but some out of Chapter 11 in the HCV guidebook. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Code of Federal Regulations, how we developed the guidebook at HUD based on those regulations. And one thing that I specifically would like to highlight now is that if at any time, if there's ever a discrepancy or a difference between a guidebook or the CFR, that the CFR would take precedence, that Code of Federal Regulations that is used to develop actual policy for us to develop a guidebook. So that being said, I will share my screen and we'll get going here. So like I said, used to develop a guidebook, is the Code of Federal Regulations, and specific to what I'm talking about today, Title 24, and then the subparts 900 series, 980s kind of covers the HCV program. There's lots of places on the web where you can find this information. The website I have up here is just the ECFR. And you can scroll down and see all the various sections and subsections that apply to the Housing Choice Voucher Program. So, sorry for the pause there. It takes me a little bit of time to stop sharing and reshare my screen. So, specifically, what I'm going to talk about today is eligibility determination and denial of assistance specifically. And what you're looking at here is the actual Housing Choice Voucher Program Guidebook. And this is Chapter 5 out of the guidebook. I'm not going to scroll all the way through it, but you can also find this on the web or on the HUD SharePoint websites to review. It has lots of links, as you can see here, to different amplifying sections and pieces of information. So one last time, we'll go here. So again, my name is Rob Snyder. I'm a fairly new portfolio management specialist with the Public Housing Office in San Antonio, and I'm going to talk about the eligibility determination and denial of assistance for the Housing Choice Voucher Program. So a quick overview, and something that the guidebook highlights is things that the PHA should strive and work for, and the two things is objectivity and consistency when they evaluate families for program eligibility or denial. The guidebook states that we have to give all families an opportunity to explain their circumstances, right? And no family is created equal. So we're going to talk about 4 criteria in just a minute that the housing authorities will utilize when looking at families to determine eligibility for them. So the 4 factors that I was just talking about, you guys can see them there on the screen, is family eligibility requirements, income limits, any student statuses, and citizenship status. The PHAs have to conduct screenings that result in applicants being either given or denied assistance. And then Chapter 12 of the guidebook talks a little bit about this. There's some compliance issues and regulatory compliance if assistance is denied, that it's highly recommended and mandatory that the housing authority should review Section 12 of the guidebook because there's some requirements that go along with denial of assistance. So a little bit on eligibility, the determination and denial of assistance. Many forms that the housing authorities will have that the household sign giving consent to verify various pieces of information. Applicants have to provide their social security numbers. The PHAs will conduct background screenings And then under no circumstances or household member are allowed to have a lifetime sex offender registration requirement. That is an automatic denial of assistance under the HCV program. Any adult household member has to consent to a criminal background check. And then most of the housing authorities are very, very familiar with the EIV system, but that is the system that we utilize for these various verifications. Specifically, the existing tenant search will allow the housing authority to allow the housing authority to eliminate the possibility of family being provided double assistance from two different buckets, so to speak. And then denial of assistance if somebody's, or if a family were already receiving assistance or have an outstanding debt to another PHA, those types of reasons would be identified under the existing tenant search and the EIV system. So eligibility requirements. HUD defines, and it's, I would encourage you all to definitely read through the guidebook. HUD defines what is a family, and I won't read off all of these, but what I will say is pretty much any conceivable combination of folks or a single person constitutes a family. It's a group of persons living together, includes but not limited to, as you can see, a family with or without children, elderly folks or near elderly, displaced or disabled, and then also a remaining member of the family or just a single person. So on to the next of the four criteria that housing authorities are required to take a look at before providing assistance is income limits. And HUD establishes income limits by family size based on the geographic location of where the housing authority is located, right? Because cost of living varies sometimes greatly throughout different geographic areas. And then to be eligible for the program, the family either has to be very low income or low income at 50% or 80% of the median income. And then they can be continuously assisted under the HCV program. Those income limits are published yearly by HUD, and on that SharePoint website that I showed you guys, there's a link to those. They were published this past May of 2024 for this year. So targeting the income and applying the limits, the PHA needs to strive to have at least 75% of the families at that ELI level, the extra low income. Less than that, the housing authority would have to request approval from HUD. The family's annual income is compared to the limit to determine the eligibility, essentially. And then the family's income has to be within the limits of the jurisdiction when the family receives the voucher. Now, if the housing authority has more than one income limit, the housing authority is required to use the higher of the two. Okay, the third criteria for housing authorities to take a look at are student status, and we'll talk about some restrictions here on students and eligibility. Higher education, that students that aren't going to be living with their parents, right? They meet the additional criteria, whether they're full or part-time status. And then students will receive assistance as long as they meet one, if they're eligible, and they meet one of the following, as you can see: veteran, married, 24 age or older, dependent child, persons with disabilities, and so on. I'll bring some attention to that age limit, 24 years of age or older, and towards the end, I guess during the Q&A session, I may plug the Foster Youth Initiative, which I work on in the San Antonio field office to promote that. That part of the Housing Choice Voucher Program specifically targets previous foster youth that are less than 24 years of age. So that program, in comparison here, really closes the gap for those folks. Here's some more of those restrictions for student eligibility, kind of continued here. The second bullet there talks about emancipation or legal guardianship is determined by a court if that was immediately prior to becoming of age.
Hey, Rob, are you able to take questions as you go?
David, I can take them as I go, or I thought Hattie had said we would wait to the end, but absolutely.
My mistake. I didn't hear her opening. Go ahead.
No, okay. I was trying to go with the guidelines there. So, so prohibition for some non-citizen stuff here, and non-citizen students, those with eligible immigration status for financial assistance are not eligible to receive assistance under the Housing Choice Voucher Program. That's kind of a mouthful. I guess it helps that it's on the screen there. And then a non-citizen student who is pursuing a course of study, right, or has a residence outside the U.S. and no intention of abandoning that residence to move here, or has been admitted on a temporary basis to study. And then students that have a non-citizen spouse and citizen children, then the household itself is ineligible. If the spouse is a citizen, then the assistance would be prorated based on the eligible numbers of household members. And in the guidebook, in one of the appendices, there's actually there's a chart that'll break out and kind of help the housing authorities with that calculation and determination. Citizenship status is the fourth criteria that housing authorities need to take a look at when determining eligibility for assistance. It's limited to U.S. citizens and non-citizens of that have an eligible immigration status. I guess one of the misnomers that was brought to my attention early on in HUD, or I guess maybe misnomer is not a good word, but worry of some families are mixed families. They worry about having to provide that information to receive assistance, and mixed families are eligible for a prorated assistance. HUD doesn't give that information out to ICE or anybody like that. Specifically, the information is just used for verification and to determine eligibility. Again, any household members that are under the age of 18 have to sign a declaration of their status, and then any non-compliance or non-willing to sign would just be determined ineligible. And then all documentation of citizenship status has to be submitted at the time and verified once. Now, there is an appeals process where families can request an appeal and be granted a second verification under the citizenship status verification. A little bit more on citizenship status. 30-day extension if requested to provide some of this information. Family has to certify, if they get the extension, they have to certify those efforts to obtain the evidence of their citizenship. And then again, for regulatory compliance, the PHA needs to make that in writing, that notification. And then the verification is made through CIS, the Citizenship and Immigration Service. If they can't verify that status, like I said, a secondary manual check within 10 days can be requested and completed. Finally, when housing authority needs to terminate or deny assistance, here are some for citizenship status, here are some things that must happen to keep the housing authority in good standing with compliance. Specific a statement of financial assistance that it's denied, that a notification if there's a proration or a change to proration, and then like the right to appeal, that verification for that second appeal that I mentioned, that the housing authority needs to notify folks in writing of that right, and then to request an informal hearing in lieu of that appeal. Okay, some of the compliance pieces here that I talked about with the verification requirements. Families have to provide HUD that information when requested. Shouldn't take more than 60 days, but also shouldn't be older than 60 days. Some of those documents will be, such as birth certificates and social security cards, et cetera. Again, all adult applicants in a household have to sign the HUD 9886, the authorization for release of information. And those forms are valid for 15 months from the day they're signed. Some information here on disclosure of social security numbers. Housing authorities have to require all applicants to document and disclose their social security numbers. Now the housing authority can give families more time to obtain that social security number or documentation of the number prior to the denial of an application. Folks can remain on a waiting list until the social security documentation is obtained. And then if applicants add children under the age of 6, they can be admitted for up to 90 days prior to the documentation being provided. And that's for children under the age of 6. So background screenings, again, like I mentioned earlier, housing authorities are required to conduct criminal background screenings. And really it's the primary reason is to determine if any household member is subject to the lifetime sex offender registration or at the request of an owner. Housing authorities need to use the debts owed and termination reports to see if there's any previous evictions or any other reasons for denial of admission for other housing authorities in the past. And then again, require the adult members to obtain the records from to sign the authorization so that the housing authority may obtain records from the NCIC database and police departments and law enforcement agencies. So housing authorities are absolutely within the right to deny assistance if family members are using illegal drugs or controlled substances. Any criminal records have to be maintained in the strictest, utmost confidentiality and only shared with the owner. And once they're no longer needed, like any controlled documents, they need to be disposed of properly. Housing authorities can deny that admission on previous criminal convictions or evidence that there's criminal activity. It doesn't just have to be that lifetime sex offender registration status. That is just one that is automatic per HUD guidance and the Code of Federal Regulations. Anytime that the housing authority denies admissions, they have to write to the family and let them know that they can dispute the accuracy of the screening or the record. So earlier I mentioned that housing authorities would use the income, the verification system, the EIV system at admissions. And this is just some of the different tools within EIV that housing authorities will use. the first one there talks about the sex offenders and allowing housing authorities to allow ex-sex offenders to rejoin their families. That would be offenders that aren't on the lifetime registration status. And then the tenant search again to see if a family is being assisted by another housing authority. The EIV debts owed to check and see if there's any owed debts or terminations in the database. And then the EIV income report 120 days after the new admission is processed to verify the income. Some notifications that the housing, wanted to cover this again because it's regulatory compliance stuff, notifications to the family from the housing authority, the right to provide emergency contact and the HUD form numbers there, and then the supplemental application for the housing meets that requirement. And then some applicants notifications must include the following: the statement of financial assistance is contingent upon the submission and verification of that citizenship or eligible immigration. A specific description of the required documents and time periods for submission. So the housing authority really needs to outline what specific documentation they're looking for from families and how long they are going to give the families to submit that required documentation. The guidance given here is specifically so the housing authority, it won't keep the families in limbo, but will also move the program along, right? The more efficient folks get, families can get their documentation in and get an answer yes or no for assistance, the housing authority can move on down their list to the next family and hopefully try to get more folks provided assistance that way. And then any statement that assistance will be terminated, denied, or prorated, notification must be made to the applicants. And then any notification and communication has to, I kind of spoke to that a little bit, must ensure effective communication, but specifically for persons with disabilities. And denial of assistance, like I said, the voucher guidebook chapter 12 kind of talks about denial of assistance. So we're not going to cover all that chapter today, but when denying assistance, it's definitely good, like I said, to review that chapter and take a look at that chapter of the guidebook for some information. So assistance can be denied for violations of program requirements, and some of those are listed there. And then again, housing authorities are given discretion to deny based on action or failure to act. And the housing authority are required to deny lifetime registered sex offenders. And also persons convicted of methamphetamine production and assisted housing, they're required to deny them. So if folks were producing methamphetamine and assisted housing, they are required to deny them assistance as well. And with that, I'd like to open it up for some discussion and questions. And I can share some of those other screens if there's questions on those. I'm hoping there's some questions out there. See, I have something in the chat. Okay, from Mr. Cortez, it says, what would the protocol for a housing authority to initial when either a dual assistance family member or debt owed to another housing authority? So if there's a debt owed to a housing authority based on the guidance and the CFR, the the housing authority would be within the rights to deny assistance. But I will draw your attention back to some of the first things I talked about, and let me pull it up here real fast because I wanted to show it a little bit. Here we go. Give me 1 second. So if we look specifically here, you guys can see this part of my screen. In chapter 1, it talks about requirements for housing authorities, and I think it's the third sentence here. It's about right here. If you can see, it says housing authorities should strive for objectivity and consistency when applying the criteria to evaluate eligibility of families who apply. So I don't think there would be any problem with the housing authority allowing that family time to maybe settle their debts or make a payment plan to the other housing authority to get that money paid off, instead of just initially denying them, allowing them to maybe stay on the waiting list and settle their debt. Hopefully that answers that question. I don't see any other questions in the chat. Do we have any other questions? Hopefully there's a few.
Looks like we have a quiet group this afternoon.
We do. We do. So I guess I have a question for the group, and maybe anyone here could maybe answer me. Do any of the housing authorities online participate in the foster youth to independence initiative? Those 25 vouchers a year that HUD issues and allows? Can you guys actually hear me?
I can hear you, so I'm sure everybody else can. If you want to unmute, you're more than welcome to.
Hi there, I can hear you.
Is that James?
Oh, can you hear me now? Sorry.
I can't. James, which housing authority are you with?
So I'm with the San Antonio Housing Authority, and I'm a brand new policy analyst. I just started about a month ago. So
welcome.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's been great. One of my first assignments was to read through our administrative plan, and so I'm still very much learning about the eligibility process and how the wait lists are determined and followed up with. So I apologize that I don't have more specific questions right now. I'm just kind of taking everything in. But I did see the recent PIH notice about the foster care system, and I reached out to my supervisor, and I believe it doesn't apply to our agency right now because of our MTW status, but
right. Yeah, which is unfortunate because Saha is a huge housing authority, and there's definitely a need in Bexar County and the San Antonio area for that help for the young folks.
Sure. Yeah, I do think we partner with an outside agency. They have something called the Through program.
Right.
That's working with foster care, but we're going to be writing down the notice and making sure to apply it in the future if we are going to take advantage of that program. Awesome.
That is awesome. So I don't see any names. I do see Edinburgh Housing, which I know that name, but I don't know like David Cortez, or what housing authority you were with, or Edia Madero, I believe I pronounced that correctly. And then I think probably Jay and the last name, Chriswell. Oh, okay. So Mr. Cortez, you're with San Benito. So you guys do foster to youth initiative. I believe we have that. So as far as questions for eligibility, are you guys old hat? Have you been doing this a while and you just have it figured out? You other folks that aren't James, that's kind of new, or okay, thanks, Adia. I see your chats. Are some of you guys unable to? Because I can unmute. Are some of you guys unable to unmute your lines?
Yeah, it's working for me. It's working fine.
Right. Okay. I guess folks maybe they may be a little shy.
Rob, this is Joe. I'm just joining your presentation, but I can hear you and hopefully you can hear me.
Yeah, I can, Joe. Actually, I just wrapped up the presentation and we had a couple of questions, but I'm not sure we have any more. I was talking to James McKenzie there from Saha. He's actually fairly new. And then answered a question from Mr. Cortez there from San Benito. And yes, I can send out a copy of the PowerPoint. I can either do that through Mr. Bussell, or if you guys just want to email me directly, james.r.snyder@hud.gov. I'd be more than happy to share it with you.
The PowerPoint is actually on the website. If you go to the place where you sign up for the different classes, you can get a copy there.
Right.
Just in case the person wanted to do that.
Who is on the line from Edinburgh?
While we're waiting for Edinburgh to respond, David posted in the chat section, he said that he doesn't have a mic or a camera. Just so everybody knows, you can, through Zoom, once you do click on that link, Zoom will give you an option to either connect by your computer or you can call in, and it'll give you a phone number and a meeting ID that you can type in and use your phone if you would like. So that way you're not having to chat or text or whatever. Just a little helpful advice.
Hi, hello.
Hi there, Edinburgh. Who's on the line from Edinburgh?
So there's Yesenia, and I also have Mr. Pequeño, and then I have Cassie, and then myself, Judith.
Oh, how are you guys doing?
We're doing great, learning a lot.
Awesome. So hopefully, give me one question at least.
So I just wanted to be clear. I've never heard about the kids being under 6, that we can enter them into the program before they provide documents. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And they have 6 months?
Correct.
To provide those documents. Okay, that was actually new for me. I hadn't heard that before.
It's actually new in the guidebook. It was a change to policy, and in the old guidebook, it was different. So this new chapter of this guidebook was published, I want to say back in April or May. They consistently update this guidebook, and out of 24 chapters, I think they've gotten through probably about 10. And that SharePoint site that I shared with you guys you can see which ones are due to come out new for an update.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hey, Rob, it's David. I have a question for you. Sorry, I dropped off and I was trying to check out Terry's presentations. I just got back in.
Oh, sure.
So on the student rule, under 24, I know we had one. I had one a while back. Well, it's been years. Person came in. They weren't a foster child, but they were saying, "Look, I've been estranged from my parents for years. They've never given me a dime, never will give me a dime. Having to count their income in my eligibility, disqualifies me." Do you know is there any latitude, or does anybody on the line know if there's any latitude in a situation like that for a waiver or some other circumstance where a person can say, I'm basically like a foster child. I really have no parents.
Right. That's a tough question. So under the normal HCV guidance, David, I do not know, but we have had this question come up a couple of times under the Foster Youth to Independence Initiative, and the way the notice read, it talks about one of the requirements is they're either homeless or at risk of being homeless, and it doesn't tie that statement directly to prior foster care. So I guess there's some interpretation there that if it's a youth and they're homeless or at risk of being homeless, as determined by, I guess, the housing authority or the public child welfare agency, that they would be eligible for a referral for a voucher. But under the regular HCV, I do not know.
So the key is getting referred by the child welfare agency, right?
That is correct.
Okay, so
The housing
maybe that's the way
authorities-
to go, because it does seem kind of unfair on the surface. We were really this is probably 5 years ago when the student was, and we were just like, she was sleeping in her car. It was such a sad story, and we were like, we don't know what to tell you. Unfortunately, we can't get around that.
Yeah, it's tough. One of the things I like best about working on that is there's definitely a need for those young folks. And the normal voucher program doesn't allow for that, right? You got to be over 24. So I think it's filling the gap. I don't think we've definitely not hit the mark and solved all the problems of the world, but I think it's definitely a huge step in the right direction, with respect to that piece. So I see that, I don't know the first name. I think the last name is either Chriswell or Siswell from McKinney. Welcome and congratulations, I guess, for starting a couple of weeks ago. Does your microphone, do you have microphone, or if you'd like to chat a question, maybe field a question via chat. I know sometimes when you're a new person, it's tough because you're trying to figure out what is, what's important. I know sometimes I'm still trying to figure out which end is up.
Really, really fragmented guidance on a lot of our programs, right? It feels like a hunt and peck. At least we have a guidebook. That's an improvement. For a long time we didn't even have that. So it's definitely challenging on all HUD programs, the fragmented nature of our guidance.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you, David, on that. I have been exposed to that a little bit. Not necessarily frustrated, but it's definitely fragmented. You have to know where to go or where to look for these things. So any more questions from folks? Anything we can answer with respect to this eligibility, or it's always a good opportunity to ask any question. Specifically, my two bosses are on the line right now, so if with my immaturity with respect to HUD, I can't answer the question. I could always ask one of those guys if they might be able to answer a question for you. They might yell at me later for opening it up like that. But if you guys have any question you'd like to throw out right now, you know, you have a couple of experts on the call.
So Rob, this is Joe, and I'm the deputy director. I know some of you in the San Antonio office. One of the issues that is coming up quite a bit in the larger context of a lot of housing authorities looking to move from public housing over to vouchers. And I know there's some specific issues that come up as folks are looking to transition, and many of those that come up with the project-based voucher program. I don't know if you discussed any of those type of issues earlier, but does anyone have questions about that? Not sure that we can answer them, all of them immediately, but we are interested in things that are on the minds of housing authorities as they're kind of looking to see what the future is, what they will do with public housing, and where they're considering repositioning and conversion of those public housing units over to a voucher-based platform. Does anyone have any questions or thoughts you'd like to share on that? Is anyone doing repositioning right now? It's on the call.
Well, I'll throw out a question, maybe not on that topic, but another question for the group maybe, and we can let people weigh in. And I'll say I have an opinion on it, but I don't know if I have the exact right answer, but I'm curious what you guys think. So let's say you're screening for admission, and it's not methamphetamine or sex predator, because we know those are lifetime bans, right? Whenever I find out about that, I got to say, oops, not eligible. You know, your lifetime sex predator ban or methamphetamine producer in assisted housing, you're out. Grounds for denial or termination. What if it's something I could have denied you? Let's say it's a recent history of criminal activity, violent criminal activity, and you didn't lie on your application. You disclosed everything that you were asked to. I just overlooked it. And a month after I admit you, I see, oh crap, you were convicted of a serious violent crime last year, and I should not have admitted you. What now? Can you terminate assistance for that person?
I think Edinburgh says give them 30 days.
Yeah.
Rob, you have opinion on it?
I do. Again, I think letting the housing authorities exercise that prudence and some of that discretion that the guidebook talks about is important. But I think it definitely gives them the leeway to terminate. And I was actually trying to pull it up here as you were asking the question in the guidebook, but they can terminate that eligibility. They have to notify the family in writing with the intent to terminate assistance and give the reason. But
I thought generally the termination was for things that happened after admission, right? Once admitted, my screening opportunity has come and gone. You haven't done anything wrong since I admitted you. That would be grounds for termination. That's where I'm struggling with it. I think I always go ahead.
So yeah, I hear you on that part. I get that. I guess I'll liken it to, and the criminal activity wouldn't have to be like, say, the two mandatory grounds for termination or denial, rather, not termination, which is a lifetime registered sex offender, or if someone was convicted of producing methamphetamine in housing. I think if a housing authority, or if somehow that was missed in the initial verification process, and then it came to light later that yes, in fact, this person is a lifetime registered sex offender, the housing authority would be required by law to terminate that person. They would be in non-compliance of CFR if they were housing someone, so I think.
Right. No, I agree with that. I think for lifetime registrant and methamphetamine, those are clear. It's grounds for denial or termination. Right.
So
there's no latitude.
Absolutely. I guess the way I look at that, and it's not clear, but if in one instance the housing authority could terminate based on previous information that was missed, based on their own requirements or board, maybe board directives, or any type of policy that they have in place, they could terminate. Given that they adhere to any regulatory compliance and notify the families. To your point, David, it's definitely not in writing anywhere in black and white. I guess, and you're definitely the expert specifically compared to me, but it looks like the housing authorities probably have the leeway to do it. Or the leeway to say, hey, this is a good tenant, we're helping a family here, maybe not do it. I think the one thing that HUD wants out of housing authorities is consistency, right? That your housing authorities not just picking and choosing which families, if we're gonna sort of let that slide because we missed the verification, that any missed verifications, that we're not going to go back and go after families. Just if it's a family we don't like, if we've adopted that policy, we need to be consistent of it. And I may be way off base on that.
I'm not sure, and I guess it may be a legal interpretation. If it was public housing and you had to go to court, I can see some judges saying, I'm looking at the lease. I don't see grounds for terminating this lease as you overlooked something when you entered into the lease, right? That you can't rescreen now that you've crossed that bridge. Now, if they did something after admission, so in public housing, I think you'd have a hard time getting through an eviction because you'd have to show a lease violation. If you cited those regs about what I can screen and deny you assistance, judge would say, we're not in that denial of assistance. We're in termination of assistance. So in public housing, I could see you'd have a hard time. Section 8's a little different, right? You just say, I'm going to terminate your voucher assistance. But I think it would be arguable from a legal perspective. You can't unadmit me, right? Now you have to terminate. And so anyway, I just was curious if anybody had encountered that, had experience with that.
Yeah, I don't know if they have. I think that's a great question, specifically because I feel like it highlights the importance of really doing a thorough verification, right? Because the housing authority could find itself in a position where they don't want some folks that they have because they missed something.
So Rob, there is a question that I see on the chat. Will the eligibility rules be different for say a project converting from public housing to project-based vouchers through RAD with mixed finance, essentially with home funds and low-income housing tax credits?
So I don't see that question, but I can.
Yeah, I think it just came into me because I put out the question about PVV. But I think essentially, does that change anything with respect to eligibility rules?
not with respect to the family eligibility rules, right? We're just looking for the 4 criteria, the income, the student, the citizenship status, and the background stuff. So the funding streams don't really affect those 4 criteria that I was talking about.
Okay, and not so much on eligibility, but just some things for housing authorities to think about if they are considering a conversion where they would want to operate project-based vouchers. Some different ways to do that through repositioning. If you're a public housing only housing authority, and you don't administer a voucher program, moving over to vouchers, you're going to need someone, often it's another housing authority to be the contract administrator to administer the voucher program. And then another issue that comes up frequently is we're talking about housing authorities that would then be in the position of operating PHA-owned units. There's some references to the requirements under the HOTMA Act, just requiring that housing authorities would need to have an independent entity perform certain functions for housing authority owned units, and that's rent reasonableness and HQS inspections. That issue keeps coming up very often. It seems like we're discussing that a lot more recently. But when you do mixed finance, if you're converting, that of course adds some more layering to the process. But underneath that, then you get to what you have to do under project-based vouchers, and a lot of those things, the requirements are the requirements, and we prefer that any housing authority that is thinking about doing project-based vouchers to reach out to us. We'd like to meet with you and just kind of go over the very particular order in which you have to do things under project-based vouchers. If a housing authority would have a misstep and do something out of order, beginning construction ahead of an approval, a number of things where it could mean that the transaction becomes something that is ineligible. And so we want to keep housing authorities on the right side of things as they're approaching conversion under project-based vouchers. So yeah, we're interested in having a more detailed discussion with anyone who is interested in doing PVVs.
Thanks for that, Joe. Are there any more questions in the chat? I know some folks haven't been unmuted. I wanted to kind of give it an opportunity for sort of for a last chance on the questions there. If folks have questions.